placer de darles de nuevo la bienvenida al Foro de la Nueva Comunicación que organizamos gracias a la colaboración de Vodafone. Hoy tenemos el placer de recibir como ponente al consejero delegado de Eccleshare, Mr. William Eccleshare, al que va a presentar el alto comisionado de la marca España, don Carlos Espinosa de los Monteros. La tribuna, don Carlos, es suya.
Buenos días, señoras y señores. Quizá todos ustedes conozcan la anécdota de aquel conferenciante que iba a dar una charla en un espacio público y de repente una fuerte oleada de viento se llevó por delante los papeles. Y entonces pues se quedó un poco desarmado y comenzó sus palabras diciendo: antes de venir aquí, solo Dios y yo sabíamos lo que iba a decir. Ahora, después de este viento, solo Dios lo sabe. Pues a mí me pasa algo parecido porque me he dejado las gafas y, dada mi avanzada edad, ya sin gafas leo con dificultad. Entonces, unas notitas que tenía aquí para la presentación de nuestro conferenciante, pues me las voy a guardar en el bolsillo y voy a intentar recordar lo importante. Yo creo que hoy tienen ustedes el privilegio y tenemos todos el lujo de recibir a una persona que, por su trayectoria profesional en el mundo de la publicidad y de la comunicación, es uno de esos que merece formar parte del Hall of Fame de la publicidad y de la comunicación. William Eccleshare es una persona que ha dedicado 36 años de su vida al mundo de la publicidad y comunicación. Repasando su currículum, del cual, al carecer de las notas, sin duda me olvidaré de algunos de los temas, pues es un hombre que después es un británico que estudió historia, que es casi una de las cosas mejores que se pueden estudiar, en Cambridge, y después de terminar sus estudios de historia entró como aprendiz, como practicante, en uno de esos monstruos de la comunicación como es J. Walter Thompson. Y a los 10 o 12 años de estar en Walter Thompson, acabó siendo el Managing Director de la oficina de Londres, responsable de los negocios en Europa y Middle East. Después siguió su carrera profesional siendo el CEO, el responsable de empresas tan importantes como BBDO o como Young & Rubicam, todos grandísimos nombres de la publicidad mundial. Tras 2 años en McKinsey, donde fue responsable de la estrategia y del branding, entró en el grupo Clear Channel. Clear Channel es uno de los grandísimos grupos de comunicación en el mundo, con 2 áreas principales de actuación. Uno, la gestión de cerca de 1000 estaciones de radio solo en Estados Unidos y con una presencia en 30 países. Y otra pata, otra actividad fundamental, que es la que desarrolla a través de lo que se denomina publicidad estática, publicidad al aire libre, publicidad externa, publicidad de vallas, donde en este momento gestiona más de 1 millón de soportes publicitarios en el mundo. Durante algunos años también, quizá los que conocen el mundo del entertainment recordarán que Clear Channel tenía una tercera actividad, que era la actividad de organización de grandes conciertos, de grupos de rock, de grupos musicales en general, a través de aquella empresa que se llamaba Live Nation, que fue posteriormente vendida. William es una persona que ha hecho, por tanto, todo su recorrido profesional en este mundo fascinante que es el mundo de la publicidad y comunicación, y que ahora dirige una de las 2 patas del imperio Clear Channel, la que se refiere a todo lo que es la publicidad outdoors. Y está hoy en España para ilustrarnos sobre lo que es el mundo de la publicidad en estos momentos y sobre todo lo que desde su privilegiada atalaya ve como futuro del mundo de la publicidad y la comunicación. A nosotros, desde Marca España, nos interesa mucho conocer por dónde va el mundo, cuáles son las tendencias, dónde tenemos que poner el énfasis para la comunicación de la imagen de nuestro país. Y queremos ser partners de Clear Channel y estamos en colaboración con ellos como con otros grupos para intentar, a través de su presencia mundial, potenciar lo que es la imagen de nuestro país. Para mí es un honor y un privilegio el presentar hoy aquí a William Eccleshare y espero que para ustedes también resulte de gran utilidad escuchar lo que es el mundo del media a través de uno de los más cualificados portadores. Muchas gracias por estar hoy aquí con nosotros y les cedo la palabra al conferenciante, que es por la razón por la que han venido ustedes hoy aquí. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, and thank you very much indeed, Carlos, for what I hope was a very generous introduction. Since I don't actually understand Spanish, you could have said anything at all about me, and I wouldn't know if you'd been insulting me or not. So I hope it was kind. I'm here this morning to talk really about the changing world of media, and my credentials for doing so, I think, are limited, but I should just tell you a tiny bit about myself, just in case it wasn't covered. I think of myself first and foremost as an advertising man. I have spent the vast majority of my career in advertising agencies, in WPP, in J. Walter Thompson, in Young & Rubicam, and then at BBDO. I spent a brief time at McKinsey learning about business, and for the last 5 years I've been on what we call the media owner side, running Clear Channel Outdoor. Besides being an advertising man, I like to think of myself as a historian. I studied history at Cambridge University a long time ago now, back in history itself, but I did learn quite a lot about European history, which I think helps me sometimes as I travel around this extraordinary continent. More recently, I've become an Englishman in New York, which is an interesting position to be in. And I will just share a few reflections on my perceptions of how America views our continent when I start. My work at Clear Channel is the outdoor business. We have two businesses in Clear Channel. One is the radio business, which is a US-only business, the biggest radio company in the United States, obviously going through some pretty significant change as radio becomes a digital medium. But my business is outdoor, and I am under very clear instructions this morning that I am not here to sell you on the wonders of the outdoor medium. I could do a 2-hour presentation on why out-of-home is the medium of the future. I could talk to you about how we are trying very hard to respect the beauties of the city of Madrid as we put up our digital billboards around the city, but I'm not going to do that. I really am going to restrict myself to more general points about media. What I would say, just to give you some context about our business, is our outdoor advertising business covers around 35 countries around the world in 5 continents. We have revenues of around $2 billion last year, profits of around $750 million. We employ 7,500 people around the world. We have 750,000 billboards around the world. I haven't actually counted all of them, but I know we have a lot, and according to our statisticians, we reach around 1 billion people every month. I don't quite believe that figure either, but I know we reach a lot of people through our billboards. The most important thing to think about as I start this discussion is that as a business, we are a capital-intensive business. We build bus shelters, we build billboards, we build signs in airports, signs in railway stations. It's an increasingly digital business, as you would expect, and we invest somewhere in the region of $200 million a year around the world in those infrastructures. So it is a capital-intensive business, which means we have to make decisions about where we invest. And as you'd expect with any global business running a portfolio of companies around the world, you're kind of making decisions and making bets on a balance between the developed markets and the emerging markets. We have a big business in China, we have a big business in Latin America, but you also want to continue to support those mature markets, which are your kind of guaranteed income stream. And what really struck me when I moved to the United States in the beginning of 2012, 2.5 years ago, was as I talked to investors, as I talked to the analysts, as I talked to the business community, what really struck me was the incredibly negative attitude that America was at that time taking towards Europe and towards the Eurozone in particular. Every day I would go to a meeting and people would say to me, "So, when's the Eurozone going to break up? Who's going to leave the Eurozone first? Will there still be a euro by the end of the year?" And the reporting in the American media was truly shocking to me in terms of how negative it was, particularly for somebody who was brought up as a passionate European. And I guess that in the context of that, the view of Spain was pretty negative as well, frankly. There were two things that anybody would say when they wanted to show off to me that they knew about Spain. They would first of all tell me that there was a huge housing bubble, property bubble, and the second fact that everybody seems to know about Spain is the very high youth unemployment. They would always talk about, well, you know, youth unemployment's 45, 50%. And so when it came to thinking about investment, Europe was, I would say, a difficult sell over the last 2 years, 3 years even. What is interesting to me is how much that has changed in the last 6 months. And it truly has changed dramatically. And I think it's changed for two reasons. One is because actually, and forgive me if there are Americans present this morning, but the American economy has not snapped back as some of the forecasters were saying. Yep, the American economy is certainly back on a positive trajectory, but it is not the classic snapback after a downturn that some forecasters had predicted. And so the American view that, you know, first and foremost, American companies want to invest in America has, I think, taken a bit of a knock. But secondly, and more importantly, I think the reporting around Europe and the Eurozone has got a bit quieter. And from the point of view of Spain, I think Spain has somehow or other managed, either by hiring a phenomenal PR agency or by doing some other magic work, you have got some messages across that actually Spain is one of the fastest recovering economies in Europe, and that for investors, and smart investors always like to invest at the bottom of a market and ride the upturn, that for investors, Spain is actually quite an interesting bet. It's the 4th biggest economy in Europe, it's the 13th biggest economy in the world, and if you're looking to think about a growth opportunity, then I would honestly say that the external view is that this is an interesting market. When you read that Bill Gates is investing in FCC, then Americans all sit up and say, well, what does Bill know that I don't know? And they get quite excited about that. And when you read a kind of the Moody's report that came out last month, that certainly is positive reading. When you open your newspaper today and you see forecasts for GDP growth of 1.3, 1.4%, whether you believe them or not, you certainly get a sense that there is a consensus around a positive point of view. So I would say that certainly we as a business, and in fact the reason why I'm here this week, we as a business take the view that the Spanish economy, and certainly that the Spanish advertising market, has undoubtedly seen the worst and is probably about to see a reasonably good period. Again, I wouldn't expect to see a dramatic upturn, but frankly, in the world we live in today of volatility, a steady growth might actually be preferable to a dramatic upturn followed by another bust. So that's just some observations from an advertising person who knows nothing about economics to talk a little bit about how I see the market. What I wanted to focus on this morning, and what I was asked to talk about, was the changing world of media and how media is evolving. And I'm sure many of you have heard speeches and talks and read articles about how media is changing and how the world of media is going through a period of significant transformation. The first thing I would say is that if you are reading or listening to anybody about the world of media, you should make absolutely certain that they were born after 1985. Anyone born before 1985, in my view, is an unreliable witness when it comes to media. And I suspect, looking around the room, frankly, that most of us were born before 1985. I personally was born in the 1950s, and I am not qualified. I'm truly not qualified to talk about media today. If you want to know about media and you weren't born after 1985, then my advice to you is have a child. And if you don't have a child, then either go and make a child, or adopt a child, or find some friends who have a child who you can talk to. Because I learn most of what I know about media, and most of what you'll hear this morning, I learned from my 3 children who were all born after 1985. Because unless you truly understand technology and the fast-changing world of technology, then I genuinely believe it is very, very hard to really get what is going on in media today. The second thing I would say is to remember what Bill Gates said. That's the second name check for Bill Gates this morning, so he's clearly doing something right. Bill Gates said that we all tend to underestimate the technological impact of change over the 2-year period. Sorry, we overestimate the change over the 2-year period, and we underestimate the change over a 10-year period. So what we tend to do is think everything's going to change in the next 2 years, and then it doesn't. And then over the 10-year period, actually the change is phenomenal. And I think that's exactly what's happening in media. I think for a long time, everybody said, oh, the internet's going to change everything, and it didn't. But what's actually happening is that now, not just the internet, but digital technologies in general are truly transforming the world of media. So there's nothing new there. I've said absolutely nothing of any interest or moment or importance there. You all knew that already. I want to talk about 5 key topics that, to me, are the relevant ones and the ones that really affect anybody working in the world of media in the second decade of this century. The first is the explosion of supply, the massive and dramatic increase in the availability of and the variety of different media. Secondly is the fragmentation of audience, the fact that mass audience doesn't exist anymore. Thirdly, the role and importance of, yes, of course, social networks and what social networks are actually doing to media. Fourthly, I want to touch on mobile and the importance of mobile connectivity. And then I'll just conclude by a few words about how all of those things are completely changing consumers' expectations, not just of media, but of business in general. The explosion of supply, the fact that there are not just multi-channel, or is just not just multi-channel television, but multi-channel everything. Everything comes at you through every possible media, and with the combination of cheap production, so that it is now far less expensive to make a television program or to produce journalism than it used to be, combination of cheap production and relaxed regulation or deregulation in many, many markets, that has completely changed our ability as consumers of media to receive and to enjoy and to consume media. And what it's also meant is that media brands, instead of being local, or instead of being regional even, have become global phenomena. So a publication like The Economist is now multi-platform. You can listen to The Economist on the internet, you can read it on your iPad, you can be tweeted by The Economist, you can join and become a friend of The Economist on Facebook, although why you'd want to, I can't imagine. And you can, of course, actually still buy a physical magazine. Sky is a global television brand, the Wall Street Journal, a global news brand. Even Spain's Hola, or Hello as we call it in the UK, has become a global media brand. So you see these global brands spanning the world, massively increasing consumer choice, massively changing the consumer's perception of what a medium is. And I think, to me, there are three results of that explosion of supply. The first is that consumers are much less willing to accept poor quality. Or put it another way, they won't accept anything that doesn't immediately interest and involve them. So whereas in the past, if you could only watch 1 or 2 or maybe 3 television channels, people would sit in front of that channel at night watching their television screen, even if there was programming that didn't particularly interest them or wasn't particularly good. They won't do that anymore. They just switch to something else or watch something else. Similarly with any kind of news or print or internet media, they just change all the time. So poor quality doesn't cut through. The interesting thing, if you work in the advertising business, is that consumers have made it very clear they don't actually like advertising very much, which is a bit of a blow for those of us who've spent our careers producing advertising, but we kind of have to get over that. They don't want to be interrupted. And whereas in the past they didn't have very much choice about whether they were interrupted or not because they had nowhere else to go, nowadays they do, and they will. And they will skip through ads through time shift. They will simply avoid the advertising. So advertising avoidance has become a huge issue for all media owners, in my view. And the subscription models, although slow to take off, and many have talked about, well, what's going to happen? Do we believe in paywalls for newspapers? My view, absolutely unequivocally, is that the subscription model is what will happen, that people will pay for content, and that people will pay, frankly, to avoid advertising. So, without wishing to sell my own medium, it does mean that a media that is in the public space, which is very hard to avoid, because you can't fast forward a billboard, does have an advantage. But quite seriously, and a more general point, is I do think that the advertising-funded model of content is going to be quite challenged in the next 10 years. Second point I talked about, or said I'd talk about, was fragmentation, which I think fragmentation together with a reduced attention span is a massively significant fact for any supplier or consumer of media. Come back to the point I made about children or young people. I don't know if any of you have ever tried watching television with people born after 1985. I find it quite an interesting experience because what they'll do, certainly in my household, maybe it's different in yours, is they will have at least 3 screens which they are consuming at the same time. It's a phenomenal achievement to be able to do this, but the television will be on in the corner of the room. The handset, phone, smartphone will be in one hand. There'll be a tablet or a laptop in the other hand. And in the case of one of my children, there may well be a PC on the floor which they are actually typing on with their toes. I mean, the dexterity of young people is extraordinary. Their attention span is very, very limited. And their ability to do 3, 4, 5 things at once, as well as sleep, is really phenomenal. And what that means is that if you really want to communicate with these people, you have to have truly, truly compelling content. So back to my first point is you really have to think about the quality of what you produce, and you really have to think about how it's targeted. Because along with fragmentation and reduced attention comes a tremendous desire for personalization. People want to be communicated to as themselves, as an individual, rather than just one of millions or billions of people. And all of that means that media has lost that ability to reach the mass audience. We've lost what we used to call the water cooler effect. The effect that I remember as a child of going into school and saying, "Did you see? Did you see that program? Did you see that thing last night on the television?" And that doesn't really happen much anymore because people are all watching at different times. They're watching their own individual programming. It's a very, very different media model. And what that means is that there is a massive premium for the big event television. It's why the Super Bowl in the United States, which I have to say is a sport which I absolutely fail to understand. I've tried really hard. It's part of the American culture, which I've worked quite hard at. I still have no idea what's going on at the Super Bowl, but what I do know is that it is event television, massively important for the advertisers who will pay a phenomenal premium in terms of the actual numbers watching, because they want to be part of event television. And again, it is why my medium is going through something of a renaissance at the moment, because we have an ability to reach a big audience, and advertisers want to reach a big audience because there is, in all communications, there is some form of multiplier effect when people see things together. And it's a strange thing because it's quite hard to research, but I think we all know the effect. If you see a film in the cinema with a large audience, it's a very different experience to seeing it at home on a DVD on your TV set. There's something about the crowd reaction. There's something about everybody laughing, everybody crying, whatever, in an audience. There's a wonderful book called The Wisdom of Crowds, which is about that effect that groupthink has. So media, whilst going through this really challenging fragmentation, has got to try to find ways of creating these big uniting events. So that's the second big theme. The third big theme is the rise and rise of social networks. And the importance of social networks, I think, for media is that everything is shared incredibly fast. Brand reputations can be built or destroyed literally in seconds, literally around the world. And that has huge implications for media and for brand owners and for communications, because social networks have a huge, obviously, upside opportunity if you can utilize them effectively as a brand owner. But one of the issues, and I love this, a quote this is from A.G. Lafley, the CEO of Procter & Gamble, who was not born after 1985. In fact, he was born sometime before 1985, but he's a very, very smart marketeer. And he said, talking about social networks and how Procter & Gamble could think about social networks, he said, the challenge is we have to let go. And for a company like Procter & Gamble, or most brand owners, they have been used to doing exactly the opposite of letting go. They've been used to holding on, controlling, managing, sweating over every full stop and comma in the text of their advertising, and controlling their brand image. If you use social networks, you've got to let go. You've got to allow the consumer to take control of your brand. And that is a really frightening thing for a brand owner. But the other thing about social networks, as I witnessed in the London riots 18 months ago, and as I suspect was relevant in the demonstrations here only this weekend, is that social networks can create activity. They can create peer-to-peer activity which nobody can control. And that, from a media owner perspective or a media management perspective, I think is a hugely significant and challenging development, and I don't think anybody's quite worked out what they do about that. Fourth point I wanted to touch on was mobile connectivity, and I think this is probably the biggest trend, or is going to have the biggest impact over the next few years. I remember back in the early 90s going to a session rather like this on the future of media. And this is why sessions like this, you should enjoy your breakfast and not listen to me, because a lot of what you learn will be completely inaccurate. I remember going to a session like this. Do please enjoy your breakfast, by the way. You don't have to just sit and listen. A session like this, and everybody talked about the connected home. Everybody's predictions, and there were 5 panelists, they all talked about how people would spend more and more time sitting at home, watching their computer screen, tied to the internet, and that this was going to mean that the whole of life evolved around the home. They could not have been more wrong, because what actually happened was we got a connected consumer, not a connected home. We got a consumer who could stay totally connected whilst out of home. And that has huge implications for media owners and for anybody who wants to communicate with people. Clearly, if you run an out-of-home media operation, the fact that more and more people spend more and more time out of home is a good thing. We like that. But it has other implications, because what it means is that consumers are accessing that flow of information that they can receive and can transact with on their mobile device. They're accessing it much closer to the point of purchase or the point of decision. So they will make their decision about whether to go to a restaurant through peer reviews, which they will receive on their mobile just minutes before they will decide whether to go into that particular restaurant. Or they will use their device for price comparisons in a retail outlet in real time in the store. And that complete access to information has an added dimension to it, which is that there is really now, I would say, a limited respect for professionals and a much greater respect for peers than there used to be. And that's why sites like TripAdvisor have such huge impact, because consumers, for some reason, have decided that experts know nothing, and that they'd rather trust the view of somebody who they've never met, who they don't know whether they're being bribed or paid or happen to have just had a very bad night because they were not feeling very well, but they'd rather trust that person who communicates on a TripAdvisor site than they would a professional restaurant critic or hotel reviewer, which is slightly perverse, but that is the world we live in. And this is, I think, combined with the whole questions of data and how data is used, I think that is going to be a pretty significant trend over the coming years. I have actually forbidden the use of the phrase big data, so I'm not going to use it because I think it's overused and misunderstood. But what I do know is that data and how we use data and how we think about our own data and how we want to protect that data and how we want to manage how brand owners use our data, that is going to be a very significant issue, which is closely related, in my view, to my final point, which is around consumer expectations. Because I think consumer expectations are at an all-time high. I think if you are in the world of media, or if you are using media to build a brand or build a service reputation, you have a more demanding consumer than you have ever had at any time in history. And I think the implications of that for us all are enormous. I think there is a massive lack of trust, and I think rebuilding that trust in this very fast changing world of media is going to be a very significant challenge for everybody, whether they're producing content or whether they are building a brand through advertising or other forms of communications. So those were my 5 points. I hope I gave you something to think about. I don't have any easy answers. All I have is a sense of fantastic, massive excitement. I have spent 35 years in the brand communications, media industries, and the last 5 have without question been the most exciting. I think the next 5, assuming I hang on long enough, I think the next 5 are going to be even more genuinely thrilling, but they will bring us all a lot of sleepless nights because we don't know what's going to happen. Don't believe anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen. Business is changing very, very fast. I would just say at the end, to reiterate what I said at the beginning, first and foremost, please, for your own health, don't underestimate the scale of change that's going on in the world of media. Don't listen to me or anybody else who was born before 1985. Find yourself some children. And especially, don't listen to an Englishman. So thank you very much indeed. I'm very happy to take any questions. Thanks a lot.
Muchas gracias, don Carlos Espinosa de los Monteros, que ha hecho la presentación. Muchas gracias, William. ¿Todo bien? Su compañía ha anunciado su apuesta por la interactividad entre móviles y soportes exteriores, una plataforma global que se llamará Connect y que supondrá un gran avance del medio exterior, generando oportunidades para que las marcas y los consumidores puedan conectar. En junio piensan poner en marcha este nuevo servicio en todo el mundo y José Antonio Carrascosa le pregunta si planean ustedes un prelanzamiento en España y en Europa aprovechando las elecciones del 25 de mayo al Parlamento Europeo y la potencialidad de esta nueva tecnología para el marketing electoral, para el marketing político.
That's an interesting question. Well, first of all, as I said, I'm not here to sell, so I very deliberately, and I hope I'll get some benefit, reward for this. I didn't come and sell you on our fantastic new technologies, but since you've given me the opportunity, I will. We have this week announced a global launch, which is interesting in the relation to technology because we see an opportunity, very briefly, for our advertising boards on bus shelters or street furniture, as we call it, to become truly interactive and to enable consumers to transact with the advertising through their mobile device. So either through NFC chips, which mean you can just tap your mobile on a little chip on the side of the board, or through the QR code technology where you take a little photograph of the code. That enables you then to transact, either to purchase directly from the advertising site or to download information or branded content or any other data from the advertiser. And it can be location specific as well. So it's a huge opportunity. We've been piloting this in a number of markets, and we now this week announced a launch around 17 countries, 75,000 sites around the world. That's the end of the commercial message. But what it does do is it does change the nature of the business. Would we use it in the European elections? No, I don't think so. I don't think we are yet ready to think about how the technology could relate to political messages, and in many countries we still have restrictions on what you can do in terms of political advertising. So that's the short answer to your question.
Continuando sobre este tema, las elecciones requieren cada vez un mayor número de soportes de publicidad exterior. Hay mucha demanda de partidos políticos y son una buena oportunidad para probar los paneles interactivos. Pero ven ustedes, le preguntan, realizar inversiones importantes en España y un crecimiento de empleo, aunque sea temporal. También le preguntan cuáles son sus previsiones de ingresos, de los ingresos que va a generar la campaña de las elecciones en el Parlamento Europeo y de qué modo va a impactar eso en su cuenta de resultados en España en particular.
Okay. Well, first of all, I really resist making predictions about advertising spend because they are invariably wrong. Everybody who has made any predictions about ad spend in Spain or in Europe or globally over the last few years has got it fundamentally wrong. So I will stand by what I said when I stood up earlier, which is I think we see a positive outlook, but I'm certainly not going to put any numbers on it. Political advertising is always an opportunity for media owners, and political activity does bring with it revenues. Again, historically, we as an industry have not seen a massive impact from the European elections. We tended not to see huge expenditures in many markets on advertising around the Euro elections, but we will look optimistically to see what happens this year.
Amalia Merallo dice, Clear Channel es líder en canales de radio en Internet. ¿Cuál es su estrategia de crecimiento de las emisoras en lengua española? ¿Tienen algún proyecto de radio online en Europa y en particular en España? ¿Cómo cree que va a reaccionar las radios convencionales, en particular las españolas, con soportes en Internet? Le siguen diciendo, la radio es un sector regulado en España y, por tanto, sometida a autorizaciones administrativas. Sin embargo, la radio en Internet no está regulada en España y se beneficia probablemente de esa falta de regulación. ¿No temen ustedes que el Gobierno y las autoridades europeas legislen para restringir la expansión de la radio en Internet y su explotación publicitaria?
So, radio is not my business. I am not an expert on the radio business. Our radio business is a US-only business and has no plans to expand into Europe. There are huge issues for foreign ownership of radio stations, rightly so. So I would say we have absolutely no plans to come into the Spanish market. I would say, as a more general comment from somebody who is absolutely not an expert in this area, that I think internet radio is going to become a very significant force. It is increasingly how young people will be listening to radio. Young people actually, in my experience, make very little distinction between how they receive something. I don't think they care, like most consumers, they don't really care whether it comes through the internet or through a broadcast signal. And I think increasingly, yes, in answer to the question, I think government will look to seek to regulate and will have to consider how it regulates.
Juan Carlos González, de Inforradio, incide en el mismo tema. ¿Qué opina de las emisiones de radio online? ¿Cree que en el futuro solo se podrá escuchar de esta manera? ¿Cuál cree que es el medio de comunicación más fiable informativamente? Ya se ha referido usted a este tema.
So I think I have really. I think I've already said that I'm certainly not qualified to answer the question. I have to say, though, if the experience of the United States is relevant, that I think both broadcast and internet radio will coexist for as long as I'm alive. There are many advantages to broadcast which the internet can't replicate. So I suspect you will see both living alongside each other for many years to come.
Alicia Velasco dice, ustedes gestionan el sistema de alquiler de bicicletas de Barcelona, que acaba de incluir en sus 420 paradas un servicio interactivo con el usuario mediante una tecnología muy innovadora. ¿Cuál es la previsión de negocio de esta actividad tras el acuerdo millonario que han suscrito ustedes con Vodafone, anunciante exclusivo en este soporte, que además va a desarrollar aplicaciones basadas en Vodafone Wallet para activar el alquiler, desanclar la bicicleta, información sobre distancia recorrida, velocidad media o impacto en la huella de carbono. ¿Por qué cree que las bicicletas Smart de alquiler no han llegado a Madrid? Quizá usted se lo pida a la alcaldesa en su reunión con ella este mediodía. ¿Están haciendo algo para penetrar en Madrid en este campo? Aquí siempre se entera uno de las cosas.
I'm looking at Bill, who runs our Spanish business. Clearly, we would love to run a bike scheme in Madrid. We are hugely committed to the bike rental scheme that we have in Barcelona. We are obviously delighted by our relationship with Vodafone. And we run bike schemes in many countries now around the world. They have proved more popular, I would say, than we had even anticipated. I was in Milan earlier this week where we run the bike scheme, and there we are just looking to expand beyond the inner city boundaries. They seem to me to be absolutely relevant to a number of the trends that I talked about. They are environmentally obviously very, very favourable. I think cities see them as a huge benefit that they bring to taxpayers within the city. And from our point of view, we see them as an enormously important part of our growth. So yeah, we would, if anybody here is from the Madrid City Council, we would love to talk to you about how we can develop.
Román Cendoya, de Intereconomía, dice: la accesibilidad a la información que permite la red y saber que luego, entre comillas, lo podemos ver, ha convertido que luego, entre comillas, quiera decir nunca, entre comillas. ¿Cómo pretenden hacer que sus impactos publicitarios sean eficaces y no se queden en un elemento más de la contaminación informativa que sufren los ciudadanos, los individuos?
Are we talking specifically about outdoor advertising or advertising in general?
La publicidad en general y en particular de la exterior, me imagino. Y en particular la información que permite las redes sociales.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same rules apply to all advertising, which is that it has to remember that, as I said earlier, consumers don't necessarily welcome advertising. Very often advertising is interrupting them when they'd rather be doing something else. So I think advertisers have a real responsibility to entertain, to involve, to engage consumers in what they're saying. And whether that's in outdoor advertising on billboards, whether that's in banner advertising on the internet, whether that's on TV advertising, the creative quality in the end is absolutely critical. And I think, that is why, having spent many of my working years in creative advertising agencies, it's why the creative people in advertising agencies are so critical to the success of a brand, because you've got to make sure that you have an original, interesting, engaging message. Otherwise, people will completely ignore it. And that rule applies to new media, digital media, or old-fashioned print advertising.
Ricardo García Vicente le pregunta ¿qué piensa, o si piensa usted que en la televisión se va a imponer el modelo de pago cuando en muchos países ha sido hasta ahora gratuita?
Personally, yeah, ultimately I do. As I said, I think the subscription model is going to become increasingly prevalent, and I think that's going to put more emphasis on quality content that people are prepared to pay for. I think if you look at Netflix and the huge success of Netflix, it is a completely different model to one that we're used to. People are watching a whole season of a drama series in one night, staying up through the night in order to do that in a way which is unimaginable to some of us sitting in this room. But my children, again, they will never watch one episode a week over a 12-week season. They would regard that as the most ridiculous idea in the world. If they want to watch a drama series, they'll stay and they'll watch it through the night, 12 episodes in one go. That's how they watch. And they'll do that on a subscription model. And that is something that I think, again, some of us who were born many years ago find very hard to understand. But it is part of the dramatic change that's going on.
Jesús Díaz, de Programa de la Publicidad, dice: la fusión del grupo Publicis y Omnicom en España y 5 países de JC de COS y CEMUSA de FCC, ¿cómo cree que les afectará a ustedes en Eccleshare en este mercado?
Well, first of all, I can't comment on the CEMUSA JC-Deco merger because it hasn't happened yet, and it's still under some review, so it would be wrong for me to comment on it. On the question of Publicis and Omnicom, I think that there is clearly a view, and it's been a view that's now been going on for, I guess 20, 30 years in the advertising business, that size is important and that scale matters, and that this is an industry that will continue to consolidate. My view is that you have to be very careful as you think about scale and consolidation, because, as I said earlier, in the end, what advertisers pay for from an advertising agency is creative quality, creative ideas. And creativity is something which doesn't necessarily scale. In fact, very often creativity is something that works better in small units. So I'm not utterly convinced that creating great monolithic advertising conglomerates is conducive to producing great creative advertising. When it comes to media, then clearly there are benefits of scale. And from our point of view as a media owner, we're very happy to work with big conglomerates or small companies. It doesn't actually make a huge difference to us. But I think if I were a client, I would be concerned about the continued creation of these monolithic operations.
Jacinto Sagredo dice: hasta hace poco tiempo, las compañías de publicidad exterior se limitaban a comercializar y alquilar soportes, pero Eccleshare tiene su propia agencia creativa, Create, integrada dentro de su estructura. El resto de las agencias, las de publicidad general, que además son clientes suyos, no ven esta diversificación como una intrusión en su negocio, una competencia con ellos.
Oh, I hope so. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think the truth is we have a responsibility as a media owner to make sure that our space is used in the best possible way. There's nothing worse if you own media to see it being badly used, because if it's being badly used, then it won't deliver for those advertisers. It won't give them the return on their investment that we believe they should be getting. And so I think it is absolutely right that we will sometimes work directly with advertisers to show them what our medium is capable of doing, to do special events for them, or particularly in the case of digital developments that are going on in our medium. Our medium is transforming from being a static medium to a digital one, to show creative people in advertising agencies or clients what the medium is capable of doing. So I see our development as a creative resource as much educative as anything else, and I think agencies mostly welcome that.
Amparo Valencia le dice: la crisis ha reducido enormemente la inversión publicitaria en todo el mundo. ¿Volverá a ser lo mismo en algún momento? Y si es así, ¿cuándo cree usted?
Nothing will ever be like it used to be. Get over it. You know, it's gone. We're in a very, very different world. I've already said I won't do predictions. I don't know when the Spanish advertising market will get back to the highs of the 2006, 2007. I don't know. It may not. I think we've all got used to a different scale of market. I think I hope we're all feeling that, you know, there is some optimism and that there is now some growth in the market. But no, I don't think we will ever go back to the past, and nor should we.
Carmen Forges dice: uno de los problemas a los que se enfrentan los anunciantes hoy es decidir en qué medios invertir, qué medios utilizar para influir en los consumidores. ¿Qué mix y qué prioridades recomendaría usted a uno de sus clientes?
Well, I would probably recommend that they spend 100% of their budget on out-of-home advertising because it's the most powerful, unmissable form of advertising. But more seriously, I would say that the most important thing is to recognize that you're trying to reach a specific audience. What advertisers want is to reach an audience. And I always say that my business is about enabling our customers to reach their customers. That's what we're about. And if I were an advertiser, what I would make certain of is that I have robust data on who the audience is and how much attention they are paying to that medium. And as I say, one of the things that concerns me about television is that you may get data that says X million people are watching, but are they really watching? And are they really paying attention? And what do they do as a result of that? So I would always advise robust data and then using my common sense and my own observation of how people really behave, and then I would make an informed decision. And then I'd put it all on outdoor advertising.
Francisco Rivero, hablando de inversión, le dices, seamos prácticos, ¿cuál es la inversión que va a hacer su empresa en España?
Am I expected to give a dollar number? I think I've said really what I can say, which is that, you can't ignore, if you are a global business and you want to have a global footprint and you operate in Europe, you can't ignore Spain, which is the fourth biggest economy in Europe. So we are clearly committed, as I would have thought any multinational operator would be, we are committed to continuing to have a strong presence in Spain, and we will invest behind that. And that's really the end of the message, because you look at each opportunity and you say, do we believe we can get a return on that investment? Yeah, clearly we do. What will we pay for that? Well, that's between us and whoever we're talking to in terms of what the particular opportunity is at any time.
Bueno, pues vamos a terminar ya con estas preguntas. Daniel Campo dice, con las nuevas tecnologías el medio exterior deja de ser puramente y exclusivamente publicitario para ser un combinado informativo publicitario y de transacciones marca consumidor. ¿Ganará peso respecto a los demás medios? ¿Desaparecerá la publicidad exterior estática tal como estaba concebida hasta ahora? Manuel Pacho dice, ¿cuál es el futuro de las agencias digitales frente a las agencias tradicionales?
So yes, is the answer. It's going through a huge change. Digital is going to become significantly more important to us. It means that we can effectively become a broadcast medium and can change copy at different times of the day. We can change copy according to the weather or according to a news event, and that's very important. It also means that we can provide public service much more easily. So we have a huge network of digital boards in the United States. At the time of the Boston bombings last April, around the Boston Marathon, we ran signs in real time during that period, informing citizens of what was going on, of the lockdown in the city, and actually helped with the capture of those terrorists. So we can provide a true public service. We increasingly provide public service messages on our digital boards, and that changes our relationship with the city, and I think makes us more valuable to cities and increases our value proposition to cities. And yes, as I said, I do believe we are transforming into a transactional medium, not just a straight one-way broadcast medium. It becomes an interactive medium as well, which is why, I think, as for other media too, but certainly for my own media and my own experience, this is the most exciting period that our industry has been in. Outdoor is the oldest form of advertising. People have stuck pictures on walls for centuries. Cavemen used to draw pictures on their caves advertising their wares. Outdoor is a very old industry, but it's going through a period of change right now, the like of which we have never seen. And I think, as I said in my talk, I think media as a whole is going through a period of change which we've never seen before.
En nombre de Vodafone, que hace posible este foro de la Nueva Comunicación,